They say the library began as a whisper, a dream carried on the winds that swept across the Mediterranean. It was Ptolemy I, one of Alexander the Great's generals, who first imagined a place where every idea, every story, every discovery known to humankind could live together under one roof. But it was his son, Ptolemy II Philadelphus, who turned that dream into stone, scroll, and flame. I was only 22 when I first walked beneath the marble archway of the Mausion, the Temple of the Muses. Even now, after so many years, I can still recall that moment. The air was cool and smelled faintly of papyrus, cedar wood, and ink. Light poured in through tall windows, golden and soft, illuminating rows upon rows of scrolls stacked like sleeping serpents of wisdom. Every corner whispered knowledge. Every shadow seemed alive with thought. We were not mere scribes. To be a librarian in Alexandria was to be part of something divine. We believed that the muses themselves blessed our work. The library was not just a building, it was a living mind, and we were its neurons, sparking endlessly with questions. Some days I would spend hours translating poetry from Athens. Other days, I would record astronomical theories from Babylon or medical discoveries from India. It felt as if the entire world spoke through our ink-stained hands. Scholars came from every land, philosophers, mathematicians, doctors, poets. The air rang with debate and laughter, sometimes heated, often humble. There was no arrogance in our learning, there was only awe. We lived by a simple belief, that truth belonged to no one yet was the inheritance of all. Each morning began with the sound of scrolls being unrolled, the gentle brushing of dust from parchment, the low murmur of reading voices. At night, oil lamps flickered as we copied the words of dead men so they might live again through us. We worked not for fame or wealth, but for continuity, for the idea that wisdom once preserved could never truly die. Outside Alexandria glittered, the crown jewel of Egypt, her white marble streets echoing with merchants and sailors. But inside the library, time itself seemed to pause. I remember touching one scroll, a treatise by Aristotle, and feeling as though I held the heartbeat of civilization. We often spoke of knowledge as if it were fire, bright, warm, eternal. But even then I sometimes wondered, could such a flame burn too brightly? Could it ever consume itself? At the time I dismissed the thought. I was young, devoted, and certain that the light of Alexandria would never fade. How little we knew then, that every flame, no matter how sacred, casts its own shadow. By the time Ptolemy there sat on the throne, the Library of Alexandria had become more than a marvel. It was a hunger that could never be fed. Knowledge arrived not in trickles, but in waves. And I, now a senior scribe, watched those waves break upon our marble shores every dawn. The harbor was the heartbeat of our city. Ships came from Athens, from Carthage, from far-off lands whose names I could barely pronounce. But they carried treasure far greater than gold. Scrolls sealed in wax, wrapped in silk, guarded like royal jewels. According to the king's decree, every vessel that entered Alexandria must surrender its writings for copying. Our scribes swarmed like bees, their quills racing the tide. Originals were kept for the great library. The owners received perfect replicas. Some called it theft. We called it preservation. Within months, our halls swelled with the voices of 1,000 civilizations. The walls themselves seemed to hum with thought. Mathematics from the Greeks, astronomy from the Babylonians, medicine from the Indians, and stories from the lands beyond the Hindu Kush, all found shelter beneath our roof. We became the keepers of the world's mind. I worked beside men whose names would echo through centuries. Eratosthenes, the mathematician, measured the circumference of the earth with nothing but shadows and reason. Callimachus, the poet, created the first catalog of our scrolls, mapping knowledge as one might map the stars. And when new scrolls arrived, he would smile and say, "The world has grown larger again." Evenings were my favorite. As the sun fell beyond the lighthouse, our towering guardian of flame, the library glowed with its own inner light. Lamps flickered, parchment rustled, and the sea sang softly beyond the walls. I would copy the words of philosophers long dead, feeling their minds breathe through mine. Sometimes I imagined that if we listened closely enough, we could hear the heartbeat of humanity itself pulsing through the ink. We believed the library was eternal. Kings would rise and fall, empires would shift, but knowledge, our sacred fire, would endure. And yet, beneath that faith, I often felt a strange unease. For when one gathers all wisdom into a single place, it becomes both a sanctuary and a target. Still, I brushed the thought aside. Alexandria was at its height, radiant and invincible. The sea brought us every secret the world had to offer, and we welcomed them all. We were guardians of truth, living in an age that shimmered like gold. But as every historian learns too late, gold can melt, and the brighter a flame burns, the more it hungers for the air that feeds it. The sea that once brought us knowledge now brought us war. It was the winter of 48 BCE, when the great Roman general Julius Caesar arrived in Alexandria, chasing his enemies and the ghost of his own ambition. The city trembled under his presence, his legions filled the streets, and his ships choked the harbor. Yet inside the library we clung to our scrolls as if ink and parchment could guard us against iron and flame. At first we believed the conflict would pass us by. We were scholars, not soldiers. The library had always been sacred, untouched by the madness of men. But power does not recognize sanctity. One night, as the city slept beneath an uneasy moon, the horizon glowed red. Caesar had ordered the burning of his own ships to block the enemy fleet, and the wind betrayed him. I remember standing by the colonnade, feeling the heat before I saw the fire. It leapt from ship to dock, from dock to warehouse, from warehouse to our beloved library. In moments, the night turned gold. Flames devoured the sky. We ran into the halls, desperate, foolish, the air filled with ash and the scent of burning papyrus. Scrolls that had survived centuries dissolved in minutes. I held in my arms the histories of Herodotus, the ink melting against my skin. The scholars shouted, pleaded, wept. Some tried to form a chain to pass buckets of water. Others simply sank to their knees, staring as their life's work became dust. Outside, the city screamed. The fire danced like a living thing, hungry, merciless. I remember seeing one of my apprentices, barely a boy, clutching a scroll to his chest as he vanished into smoke. For years I dreamed of that moment, his silhouette swallowed by orange light. When dawn came, Alexandria stood in silence. The sea was black with ash. Thousands of scrolls, perhaps hundreds of thousands, were gone. The world had grown smaller overnight. Caesar claimed it was an accident, a tragedy beyond control. History would forgive him, as it often forgives conquerors. But for us, forgiveness was hollow. We had guarded the words of every civilization, and now they floated in the air, ghosts of ink, fragments of memory. As I sifted through the ruins, I found one half-burned scroll still legible. On it were the words of an unknown philosopher. Even knowledge burns slower than ignorance. I traced the words with my trembling hand and realized that the library had never truly belonged to kings or scholars. It belonged to time. And time, indifferent and cruel, had come to collect its debt. We thought we had built eternity out of parchment and passion, but that night the fire reminded us of a bitter truth. No matter how bright wisdom burns, it too leaves ashes behind. Centuries passed and the flames of Caesar became a story, a wound whispered through generations. Yet somehow the library endured. The kings rebuilt what they could, scholars returned to salvage what was left, and the dream of knowledge flickered on like a dying star refusing to fade. But what remained was no longer the great library we had known. The halls were smaller, the shelves fewer, the laughter quieter. We worked now in the Serapeum, a grand temple built for Serapis, where philosophy and faith coexisted uneasily. There, we rebuilt what the fire had stolen. We collected new scrolls, restored what memories we could, and trained young scribes who believed, perhaps foolishly, that the world still needed us. By then, Alexandria was no longer the city of kings but a city of faiths. New gods had come, new beliefs had risen, and with them, new fears. The Roman emperors ruled with distant hands, and unrest grew like rot beneath the marble. Outside our doors, the empire trembled. Inside, we clung to reason as the world tilted toward superstition. I was an old man when Christianity began to spread across the empire. I watched as temples closed, statues were broken, and the old gods were forgotten one by one. The library, once a beacon of all knowledge, was now seen by some as a relic of pagan arrogance. Scrolls that once united civilizations were declared dangerous. Words, mere words, became enemies. When the decree of Emperor Theodosius came in 391 CE, it felt like the final breath of an age. He ordered all pagan temples to be destroyed, and with them, our Serapeum. Soldiers and zealots stormed the halls. They smashed the marble idols, tore down the shelves, and set our remaining scrolls aflame. The smoke carried the last whispers of Aristotle, Euclid, and countless unknown minds into the indifferent sky. I did not flee. There was nowhere left to run. I stood among the ruins, the weight of my years pressing down like the dust that fell from crumbling walls. Around me, the library died not with a roar, but a sigh, the slow exhale of centuries. In that silence, I understood something I never had in my youth. Knowledge is not destroyed in a single night. It dies slowly, through neglect, through fear, through the belief that there are truths not worth knowing. And as the soldiers marched away, their torches fading into the distance, I sat among the ashes and whispered a prayer, not to gods, but to memory itself. For every word lost that day, I prayed another might rise somewhere, in some heart that still dared to seek. The library is gone. No walls remain, no shelves, no faint scent of ink and oil lamps. The sea has reclaimed what was once ours. Yet even now, when I walk along the harbor at dawn, I can still feel its heartbeat beneath the waves. Slow, steady, eternal. People speak of the library as if it were destroyed in one night, one fire, one act of madness. But they are wrong. It did not die as flame-devoured parchment. It died quietly, over centuries, through indifference, through arrogance, through the slow forgetting of those who believed knowledge could wait for tomorrow. I often wonder if the world truly understood what was lost. We did not just preserve stories and science, we preserved possibility. Every scroll was a question we once dared to ask. Every shelf was a promise that wisdom could outlast empire. And yet, perhaps the library was never meant to last forever. Perhaps its destruction was not the end, but the beginning of something we could not yet see. Fire does not only consume, it also cleanses. From ashes, new questions rise. From silence, new voices learn to speak. Centuries later, travelers would come to Alexandria and find nothing but sand and stone. They would search for the library's ruins, hoping to unearth fragments of parchment, charred scrolls, traces of brilliance. But they found little. Some said the library's remains sank into the sea. Others believed it was simply lost to time. But I believe otherwise. I believe the library still lives, not in walls of marble, but in minds that remember, in souls that question, in hearts that refuse to stop seeking. For knowledge is not a structure to be built or burned. It is a spirit that survives every empire, every ruler, every century. And when I see the world today, the scholars in far lands, the children reading by candlelight, the endless exchange of words across oceans, I see reflections of that same fire we once tended. The Library of Alexandria did not die. It became the spark that lit the human mind. So when the waves crash against the old stones, I close my eyes and listen. Beneath their rhythm, I hear the whispers of the past, the voices of poets, philosophers, dreamers, all calling across time. We are still here, and perhaps that is what immortality truly means. Not marble that endures, but memory that refuses to fade. The library was built of papyrus and hope. It burned in fire and rose again in thought. And as long as there are those who seek truth in a world that often fears it, the light of Alexandria will never go out. Empires fall, flames fade, but stories, they survive. If the Library of Alexandria could speak today, what forgotten truth do you think it would tell us? Tell me in the comments, and remember, some fires never die, they just change shape.